Hi, welcome to segment 2 of our four-part podcast series with Mrs. Judith Gomez and Mr. Andres Martinez. Today we resume our conversation where we left off last time. Enjoy. I think, to be honest, nowadays we just go through the motions and we'll just do something for the sake of doing it or because it's just a tradition that we do, but and we often forget that there is a meaning and there's a purpose for why our ancestors used to do this. And it's not just something that they would do for the sake of doing. It would have true meaning within the heart.
For sure. Well, I know that like for a lot of, I mean, for me, and I know that this is true, I think, for a lot of people that sort of live in a similar cultural space, is that, a lot of us have to discover a lot of these things and sort of use our academic and intellectual sort of side as opposed to maybe our spiritual sort of side or things like that to sort of fill in a lot of the things that maybe have were lost, like Judith explained. It's a struggle for the maintenance of culture for all marginalized populations of people. And I think that that struggle involves the sort of traditional ways, right? Which means that we would have to have access to our elders, which we don't always have. We don't always have that, right? Many of us, our elders pass on, and then we realize, and I know this is pretty universal, when we come to realize, like, wait, we never had those conversations. We never did anything like what you're doing with this podcast, for example, where we kind of formally asked the questions that needed to be asked. So many generations come and go without having these pieces of information formally recorded, right? Whether it's recorded digitally like this or written down. We all know that our cultures are an oral culture. We have an oral tradition. Well, which is an incredible thing to value on the one hand. On the other, we also have to find ways to be able to, like you said, sort of modernize this so that we're able to then pass this on in other ways, because and sometimes that involves like formal academic. For me, that's what I had to do. I had to fill in a lot of information that I didn't otherwise have, from a sort of an academic point of view, and using what historians might call like a historical imagination, for example, to fill in things that that I don't have absolute evidence of, that has been written down in a journal or in a primary source or whatever somewhere. But then what I have to do is fill in using sort of sort of a reasoning process to be able to fill in, like, say, okay, if my grandma said that we have Choctaw blood, I have no choice but to, one, believe that, and to affirm that, and take it at face value. But then I've got to do some sort of investigating, almost in an intellectual or academic way, to be able to say, like, okay, well, if my grandma was born in Texas, in Amarillo specifically, it would make logical sense that there is some contact with the Choctaws. The traditional Choctaw nation is based in what we now consider the south, sort of the southeast part of the country. Mm-hmm. And so those of us who are very much a part of southwestern part, of the world, right, of this part of the world, that was interesting for me when I was a younger person, like having to like sort of bridge those together and say, well, how does that even, well, as I started to read more and find out more, it makes total sense. A lot of the people who were colonized all throughout the Southwest had all kinds of connections with indigenous various indigenous tribes, including ones that seem to be from far away areas in many cases. And so those are the pieces I think that we oftentimes have to do. And again, it's a difficult thing, because when we go into the intellectual or the academic space, we also have to sort of filter that and understand that a lot of that has been historically been so so male dominated. The narratives are oftentimes very Eurocentric, or very they have a very limited, or they have a bias, right? And so we always have to, again, use our ability to say, okay, well, we're going to consciously and deliberately look for understanding that is coming from a complete, from a different point of view that you might not otherwise get in our traditional historical accounts. We also find that sometimes the things that we hear, even within our families, oftentimes, you'll start to recognize that, well, wait a minute, that information had to be influenced by I don't know, colonial narratives, for example. So then we'll have to look at that and sort of take that into account in our understanding of things, if that even makes any sense. So that's that is one of the things that we, I feel like a lot of us, I don't think it's just within our family. It's a reality for a lot of us who identify as Chicano, is that we oftentimes find ourselves in these precarious positions where, we're having to use a language that was imposed on us through colonization to then, to navigate the world. Well, that in itself creates all kinds of limitations just from the get-go. But then we've got to be able to then, understand history and culture in a way that isn't, given or handed to us, say, for example, through the conquistadores, the Spaniards, you know what I mean? Because a lot of that is very, it's just that it's very biased. And so then we have to fit all of those pieces together. And it's a real challenge, and it's definitely a lifelong journey. There's no doubt about that.
If you don't mind, Andres did trigger something for me, and trying to keep it within your
of course
matrilineal concepts. It really is interesting. I touched on it at the beginning of my thought, but forgot to follow up. The influences of our culture, when I had said that on my father's side we had access to this religious practice of this property and the church, etc., is that I can't recreate that, because like I said, it's off the grid, so no running water, no electricity. But now with devices and phones, you can take technology with you almost anywhere. And so a lot of the practices have been very hard to maintain, because it was a really old structure, old formalized structure that gave me those experiences when I was young. Coming from, again, back to colonialization, when the Spaniards set up the religion to influence the indigenous, in order to keep that sense of power and place in society, the church stayed really strict. So they started saying things to us, because this was a church-related property and practice, that you had to have members of the penitentes, which were men, that were part of the church, but the women tended to run the community and bring everybody to the services, etc. But you had to have so many members of the men there. And when you couldn't do that, then they didn't want you to allow to have the services. And then when the women tried to still gather us, it became a conflict. And it was because it was during times of trying, of feminism and all kinds of things going on, that fell apart a little bit. So I have not been able to share those exacting experiences with my girls, because we can't recreate it. There's too many modern changes to have those experiences continue forward. And so it's just interesting how I saw that, for me personally, in my experiences, directly related to the matrilineal side. I have many aunties who have taken on the absolute formalized, strict practice of religion in my family. So as the caretaker, and I my instinct to that, my response to that is trying to keep the families together, safe as society is growing and changing around them. It must have been passed on through colonialism, to maintain those structures of our family, of being connected, of being able to be together, even if that is in the practice or guise of religion, is how I interpreted that from my experiences. And I didn't articulate that when I was giving you the progression of all of the experiences that we had. And so one thing to kind of emphasize with Amidst, and I think it's an interesting concept, and trying to find that balance for our girls, again, realizing times, whether it be in reference to technology or experiences or access to information or access to family, now that you can go further and be further apart, in modern times, is that I had a high school experience, which is very influential. I had a public education experience, so from my whole childhood growing up, which is very influential in the way you find your identity, that did not include, I knew I was brown skin color. I knew I was Mexican, Chicana. I couldn't articulate Chicana, but I knew I had those roots. I knew I had indigenous lineage in my family. I knew we had these ways that my family celebrated either holidays or different customs that were different than the kids that I grew up with. So I knew that there were those differences, and I knew that was my identity. I couldn't articulate it, and I definitely didn't have any social justice concepts associated with that as I went through high school. And I say that those terms, social justice, because that's very much connected to my Chicana identity, is those concepts. So as I came, Andres said, like from an academic concept to learn it, for me, because my school of study was not a provision to academically become articulated in these subjects. It was more about my experiences that helped me become articulated and formulate my identity for these subjects, was seeing my aunties grow and really go strong to hold the family together. For example, my dad needed to, he was underage when he joined the service, which was a whole social influence thing in our country. And my aunt, not my grandmother, but my aunt signed the papers for him. My grandmother was raised in a time where it was more male dominated. The name was important in the matrilineal society, and understanding that from our cultural references, but very much moving forward in a more assimilated sense, my grandfather had taken over a lot of those roles. Well, my aunt was very much involved in social justice issues. So the way she influenced the family at that point was she took us back, the Gomez family, back to a matrilineal structure. So when my father, as a young teenager, signed up for the Navy, she went down and she signed the papers for him. Okay. And she made those decisions for the young men in our family. And it was, in my sense, to also keep the family together, to say, this is how we operate, this is how we structure, this is how we do things. And so she was very much an influential head of our family for activism and structure like that. And my other auntie knew the traditional ways of medicine. So what we call remedios, now what they call is, health. I don't know what you refer to. Holistic. Yeah, there you go. Ways. And so my aunt was very traditionally a curandisma, who would help you, through any health situations you had. So we had those pockets of matrilineal influence in our family to carry us through, to share that information. So on my side of the family, I completely value, and I absolutely agree with Andres, just trying to explain the differences of how we come to our understanding of our identities and are able to formulate them for ourselves, and the different ways or paths that you can arrive at that. And so now going forward in more, I don't like the term modern, but in these more technological, more information time periods, is now trying to structure and help our girls. That's why we've made some family commitments and practices of, for example, their names. Another one is that we rented a couple of living spaces before we bought this house, trying to make sure, because I was very specific. Because my dad is a Mason, I had those traditions. It wasn't just his work. It was a reverence for being connected to how you build and care for things, how you impact, you know, the space you're going to take up. And so he taught us those things. So when we went to buy a house, I wanted a brick house. I had no idea. I didn't have concepts of how many bedrooms or those kinds of things that maybe more modern current situations call for. When we went to meet the real estate agent, they thought we were crazy because
resale value,
yeah,
or whatever real estate, you know, mumbo jumbo that goes on. We were thinking of, no, this space is going to represent our, you know, as much as possible, right? Like that we felt the need to have almost like a cultural connection to the space we're going to live in. It wasn't, you know, monetizing, it wasn't something we were doing for monetary gain or, you know, to participate, to further jump into the capitalist cycle or whatever, you know. Yeah.
I needed to be proud when my aunties and uncles came to my house that they knew it was a brick house, which was what a lot of, you know, the family members worked on. And then that we had trees because we grew up picking pinon and you needed to sit under the tree because it's too hot outside. I mean, all those influential things. How are you going to sleep at night after being outside working all day, right? Because that was my lineage. And my aunties taught me that. That's how you care for everybody in the family. You know, they're outside working all day. They have to have a cool place to sleep at night, to rest well, to be healthy. So I needed trees. So we made those choices. And now, and it was interesting, my cousins who were my same generation, it was just always disturbing. I couldn't articulate it, but I now know when, you know, because we came through a time, we bought our house in the late 90s, which was a housing boom. So it was very competitive and there was plenty of people to buy homes and stuff like that. That when we came in, and of course we fixed up our house, we changed some things, they would always say, oh, so what do you think you're going to get for this house now that you did this to it? And I would just be so offended. And I would just, it would disrupt my whole experience with them. And it helped me formulate, though, in the sense that now I don't think of ever living anywhere else. I can't, because my aunties and my uncles and my family know where I live. The day we brought Alma home from the hospital, word had gotten out, because we didn't have cell phone. We didn't do cell phones until just a couple of years ago, maybe 5 years ago now. So word hadn't gone out like that, but through the family chain, right? When we arrived home from the hospital, waiting on my porch was my uncle and my cousin. They had no idea when we were coming. They had no idea, you know, what was going on. But the magic of the desire of wanting to welcome a baby, those traditions of wanting to welcome a baby into the family, wanting to support a woman from having a baby in the family. They were on our front porch waiting. Best gift ever. I can't leave this house. My ancestors know where I am. So those are the ways we try to come forward and bring those experiences, you know, so that our girls can know they don't have the exacting traditions that we did. And so trying to replicate it or trying to provide them the references so that their technological modern world can still have these associations for their identity to be real.
Yeah, that's beautiful. The more I'm talking with people, and especially you, I'm beginning to realize how much meaning I have in my own family, in my own house, especially as you know, we're moving different stages in our lives and transitioning. How much meaning I have in my heart for those different things, and how much I value that within my family, especially related to my cultural identity.
Mm-hmm.
So,
absolutely. We've again, it's a long-term journey. It's not something that, you know, you wake up one day and, you know, everything falls into place and you understand all of these things. Again, I mean, we're not really practicing religious, you know, we don't really practice religion per se, but there are a lot of things that we can't help but to attribute to something of, you know, something spiritual in nature anyway, right? That means that, you know, like Judith said, there's times when, you know, there's things that happen where you're just like, wow, that, you know, that there's something else going on. We just ran into, her cousin not too long ago, and we hadn't seen him in a lot of years. And so Judith was able to recall that story for him and say, like, the cousin that we ran into, it was his dad, who's no longer with us, who was here to greet Alma on her first day, back to our house, or to our house. And so, there's so many different, like, things like that happen that, it's not, we can't help but to think has, deeper meaning, has more, it's more than just coincidence, I guess. And so, and so that those are the things. And then also, like, finding meaning in the things that, are, again, our dominant culture tells us are relatively meaningless things. We even hesitate to call things like what we're used to, and again, even language is so limiting, right? Like camping, it sounds so, like, it sounds silly, but for us, seriously, we think of it as it's like a novelty, like, oh, you like to go camping, and it's like, well, for us, it's, we don't even have another, there's got to be better words for it. But this, the colonial language that we speak is limited. And so, I'm sure there's some indigenous term that captures, the experience of it, because, for us, it's, that it's not that we're going through any kind of formal ceremony, when we do things like that, but it does at times feel ceremonial. Something is, like, for example, when we got a chance to take a lot of the kids in our family to Mexico City, and we got the chance to visit, the site of a lot of our ancestors from that part of the world, we did have a sort of a ceremony. We had a smudge. My brother-in-law, Judith's brother, he made sure to bring, some sage with us on that trip, and we pulled everybody aside, and and we said, look, this is serious, let's smudge before we go in as these tourists to check out Chichen Itza. Let's make sure that we ground ourselves and understand that we're visiting ancestors here. This is, touch those stones, touch this place, this soil, and understand that this has a lot more meaning than, a novel, tourist visitation or something like that. And so that's what I mean, is that, when we have the privilege to be able to do things like, camping and go on, vacation trips and things like that. And so I'm always searching for the language that even helps convey the importance of these things. So, like, for example, I taught my daughters that, we do what are called cultural pilgrimages, right? That visiting places like Chichen Itza, visiting places like the Huérfano, even if it's part of our family, or being able to go to various places in New Mexico or other, whatever places right here. That's pilgrimage, and it's not a religious pilgrimage, but it's a cultural pilgrimage for us. And it means that, we have, again, we're not treating it as a, even when we went to Alaska, same thing, it's there. That's not necessarily, as far as we know, part of our heritage per se, but we made sure to connect with our indigenous, what I called our indigenous cousins, in Alaska, and I think that brought hopefully a different meaning for ourselves, and then for our kids, and for our family, and we made sure to say, like, look, when we're here, we're connected ancestrally to places like this. This isn't just, again, a tourist visit, and we treat, things like that as much as possible in that way. We have the privilege of visiting Mexico, and we always try to remind our, our kids and remind even our families that, this is more than just a vacation. Of course everybody loves vacations. Everybody loves to visit, exotic, quote unquote, exotic places. But for us, we try to make it more than that, and so that's a really important element of our experience as a family.